Okay.
This year, we're not sure what I do.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the August 9th, 2022 special City Council meeting. I am Mayor Ross, and tonight's special meeting is brought to you live using the video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. Tonight's recording will be posted on the city's YouTube channel. Welcome to all, and thank you for joining us. City Clerk Estrada, would you please take the roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mayor Ross.
I am present.
Councilmember Benson.
Here.
Councilmember Christensen.
Here.
Councilmember Holloway.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Lassay.
Here.
Councilmember Mayhew. Councilmember Watton.
Okay, so I believe Councilmember Mayhew is having internet issues, so she'll be joining us shortly. And I have not heard from Councilmember Watton. Let's see if he texted. Nope. Should we go ahead and excuse? Is there a motion to excuse?
Move to excuse Councilmember Watton.
Is there a second?
I will second, but I think he's going to show up.
I think so too, but it has been moved and seconded by Councilmember Holloway and Councilmember Benson.
If he shows up, you just hold the door closed because he's excused.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? So Councilmember Watton is excused.
Move to excuse Councilmember Mayhew in case he doesn't show up.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilmember Johnson and seconded by Councilmember Holloway to excuse Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, nay? So it passes. Both are excused. So as a reminder, members must seek recognition from the chair before speaking, and be sure to raise your hand. And we now move to the first item of special business, which is to approve the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the special meeting agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Councilmember Christensen and seconded by Councilmember Holloway. Any discussion? Nope. All those that approve, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion passes unanimously, and the special meeting agenda is approved, and Councilmember Watton has just joined us, so please remove the excused absence.
You're excused. Thank you.
First item, the discussion this evening is Agenda Bill 22-098, Mill Site Planned Commercial Industrial Plan Quasi-Judicial Land Use Matter. The applicant is seeking city approval of the planned commercial industrial plan. And we will please note that because this is city council consideration of the mill site PCI plan, it is a closed record proceeding where the council considers the application based on the record that was made before the city's hearing examiner. Public comment on the mill site quasi-judicial land use matter will not be accepted. We welcome City Attorney Adams Pratt this evening, and she will address the legal parameters pertaining to quasi-judicial land use matters, including the appearance of fairness doctrine.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate you letting me fill in for City Attorney Sturbank tonight. I will be going over the quasi-judicial appearance of fairness questions for you. I know you're very familiar with those, given that you have been in this hearing already for multiple nights. So as you know, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning council is acting like a judge. Because this matter involves a specific property site, council is applying a specific set of defined criteria, in this case, the PCI and the PUD criteria. Specific parties, we have the applicant and the people and the entities who testified in opposition before the hearing examiner. As a reminder, as the mayor just went through, this is a closed record hearing. Council's consideration of this matter is governed by the appearance of fairness, which is designed to ensure that a quasi-judicial matter like this is not only fair, but appears to be fair. So we're going to go through a series of questions now addressing whether there have been any off-the-record or ex parte communications between council, the proponents of this matter, or opponents of the project, and whether any council members are potentially biased or not able to judge this matter fairly. Since the portion of the quasi-judicial hearing that was held last night, since that time, have you obtained any financial or ownership interest in the mill site property? Councilmember Benson?
Since last night?
Since
No.
last night,
No.
sir. Thank you. Councilmember Wooten?
No.
Councilmember Holloway?
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew, sorry, not here, Mayhem.
I like that.
Okay. Councilmember Lassay,
No.
and Councilmember Christensen,
No.
and Councilmember Johnson.
No.
Okay. Again, since you heard this matter last night, have you acquired any connections to the applicant, Snoqualmie Mill Ventures LLC, or its representatives, or any party opposed to the proposed action? Councilmember Benson,
No.
Councilmember Wotton,
No.
Councilmember Holloway,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew, Councilmember Lassay,
No.
Councilmember Christensen,
No.
and Councilmember Johnson.
No.
Again, since last night, have you acquired an interest such that you stand to gain or lose directly as a result of approval or disapproval of this matter? Councilmember Benson,
No.
Councilmember Wotton,
No.
Councilmember Holloway,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew, Councilmember Lassay,
No.
Councilmember Christensen,
No.
and Councilmember Johnson.
No.
Since last night, have you become employed by or have any prospective employment with any of the parties to this proceeding? Councilmember Benson,
No.
Councilmember Wotton,
No.
Councilmember Holloway,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew, Councilmember Lassay,
No.
Councilmember Christensen,
No.
Councilmember Johnson.
No.
Is there any reason you believe you cannot judge this matter impartially? Councilmember Benson,
No.
Councilmember Wooten,
No.
Councilmember Holloway,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew, Councilmember Lassay,
No.
Councilmember Christensen,
No.
Councilmember Johnson.
No.
And the last question, since last night, have you had any ex parte contacts with the proponents or the opponents concerning the proposed action? If anyone has, we'll go into this further after we learn what those contacts were. So Councilmember Benson,
No.
Councilmember Wooten,
No.
Councilmember Holloway,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew, Councilmember Lassay,
Nope.
Councilmember Christensen, no, Councilmember Johnson.
No.
Okay, and since Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew is not here as yet, it sounds like that's
He's got
gonna-
no internet.
no internet.
Yeah.
So we'll want to make sure that we talk with City Attorney Sturbank to make sure that tonight's proceeding is reviewed and the appearance of fairness doctrine is reviewed before any participation in deliberations or anything. If the internet isn't able to be restored and can participate tonight.
Okay.
Not a problem, it can be done.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, City Attorney Adams Pratt. Now I turn over to Jason Rogers, who will present the comprehensive plan policies and conditions of approval.
Good evening, Jason Rogers, Senior Planner with the Community Development Department here at the City of Snoqualmie. Let me grab, sorry, the right thing up here. Slide that into this.
Can you be shorter?
My knees may not take this. We'll see how long I can do this.
It's like she said, Jason, you can be heard on the audio, it's just in the room.
Yeah,
So
I'll try to channel and project a little more here. So introductory slide, here we are tonight on August 9th. Come on. As usual, I'll give you a brief overview of the schedule and what we're going to be looking at tonight. So here we are, move the arrow down another notch, we're on August 9th. Tonight we will be looking at the comprehensive plan conformance and the conditions of approval. Again, hopefully you've all had a chance to review the materials. And of course, this schedule will take the council through final action in September. So we've talked before, the PCI plan decision has several subparts. We're continuing discussion of the PUD criteria in chapter 1750 of the city's code. All the PUD code requires that a report be made to the council that contains analysis of the PCI plan's conformance with the comprehensive plan. That's in section 17.50.090 subsection E6. And so that's really where we're focusing discussion for tonight for the first part. So as I mentioned, picking up from yesterday's discussion, there are 23 comprehensive plan policies that apply in some fashion to development on the Snoqualmie Mill site. We can jump right back into the discussion of community character. This is element 5 of the city's comprehensive plan, and specifically section E9 of that element. This discusses things that development on the Snoqualmie Mill site would need to do. So this is things like improving access to the site, and connectivity to regional trails. It's the ensuring environmental cleanup of the site, and preserving the old powerhouse building. So as we've talked about, the proposed PCI plan would be doing these things. We discussed yesterday talking about the number of public comments that the city received this specifically. I believe I mentioned there are just over 30 written public comments and of course verbal testimony to the hearing examiner. That's all in the record. You can go look at them. They're on the city's website. They're in the link to the record that we sent you. These two photos, again, you saw these last night. This one on the left is from 1944, shows a view of, this is the historic powerhouse and its smokestack here. This lighter one that's harder to see here was demolished in the early 2000s. It was built in 1944. Then there's some additional facilities that have since been demolished. This one on the right is taken sometime between 1930 and 1952. You can see this, again, the site was very heavily used as a lumber mill, and much of it was cleared. And so this would be the planning area 2 up here, and at least the eastern portion of planning area 3 down here, based on the current PCI plan. Again, you can see the historic town of Snoqualmie Falls up on the hill. This was a company town. It contained the community center and the hospital, the hotel, and the grade school for the community. And it was, at its peak, had about 5,000 people in it. So planning for development or redevelopment of the Snoqualmie Mill site began almost 30 years ago, and this is shortly after Weyerhaeuser shuttered the main mill operations in 1989. In the current version of the comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2014, there's an extensive discussion of the Snoqualmie Mills area and redevelopment opportunities for this area. This comp plan discussion identifies a number of the same issues we've already been discussing as part of the PCI plan, things like site contamination and flooding and critical areas. The site, as you know, has long been used as a heavy industrial site, and only recently, over the last 20 years or so, has that intensive use ceased, and the site is what it is today, which is used only for dirt fish and some other largely storage activities. So the proposed PCI plan, per the staff report analysis and adopted by the hearing examiner, shows that the proposed PCI plan would fit with Snoqualmie's character and the character of the mill site neighborhood in the comprehensive plan by providing for redevelopment of this underutilized site as a major employment center and as an integral part of Snoqualmie. Continuing on with the comprehensive plan, this is figure 5.12 from the comprehensive plan. It's the neighborhood profile map for the mill site. I already mentioned this is in section E9 of the community character element, and that element discusses the various issues and opportunities. You can see here that at the time this was written in 2014, the scope of the site was a little bit smaller, so it doesn't include the large wetland, which is on in the northern area there, and does not include any of the floodway areas, which are on the southwestern portion. The actual mill site itself today, of course, encompasses this large wetland area up here, and then the floodway area is extending down to Borst Lake down here. Moving on, there are 3 comprehensive plan policies related to economic development about the Snoqualmie Mill site. These policies encourage providing higher wage jobs in a higher employment density while limiting lower wage jobs and lower employment densities. This supports the city's tax base and also provides opportunities, job opportunities suited to the education level and skills of the city's citizens, the people who live here. This project would provide at full build out over 3,400 jobs, predominantly higher wage jobs in a higher density employment setting. As we discussed, 64% of the site would be left as open space, and so it would concentrate the employment, those 3,400 jobs, in the 36% of the site that would be developed. These policies, the economic development, the transformation of underutilized lands such as brownfields into viable mixed use or commercial industrial employment areas. Obviously, this PCI plan would directly accomplish that by redeveloping the site, a brownfield site, into a commercial industrial employment area while cleaning up all the legacy contamination. For open space and the environment, there are 4 applicable comprehensive plan policies here. These policies call for a couple things. One is balancing development with environmental protection. As I just mentioned, this project would retain a significant portion of the site as open space, including 67% of planning area 1 and 64% of the total site when built out. So on a 261 acre site, 64% open space is a pretty significant amount of space. The second part is that there's individual policies calling for protection of critical areas to maintain their natural condition, no net loss of critical areas and buffers, and also restoration of disturbed buffers. Of course, as we've discussed, the existing critical areas on the site and their associated buffers are highly degraded due to the historic use of the property. There are non-existent buffers in some cases. This PCI plan proposal, as we discussed through the deviation discussion, would be enhancing and restoring the buffers to ensure their continued functionality and protection of the critical areas. This PCI plan, of course, would result in a net gain of buffers over the standard requirement, and this is a substantial increase compared to the current state, of course, with little or no functional buffers. This is from the conceptual landscape plan included in the application. You can see, I mean, disregarding the parking lot for a second, which has hopefully a lot of trees in it, you can see the amount of green space. We're not even showing the full extent of wetland 11 here off to the north within planning area 1. But there's these large perimeter areas around the wetland here, more wetland buffers down around in through here, and then of course perimeter screening along Mill Pond Road. The council should recall the discussion yesterday about transportation. It's very common for certain subjects, such as transportation, to be emphasized in multiple areas. So yesterday we discussed this in the context of environmental impacts, and tonight we're discussing it in the context of comprehensive plan conformance. There's a policy in the comprehensive plan here that says that transportation improvements to accommodate the impacts of development must be provided concurrent with that development. Now, concurrent doesn't necessarily mean at the same time, it means within a certain planning horizon. As you'll recall, development of planning area 1, the EIS analysis indicated that there's only one intersection that would see a level of service reduction compared to the no build or the baseline scenario. That's the one at Fisher Avenue and Snoqualmie Parkway. The state's SR 18 interchange project would alleviate the current issues there even with full build out of the project. Full build out, of course, would also result in greater impacts on the city's roadway network due to the amount of traffic generated, but the EIS identifies a number of necessary improvements throughout the city. And to answer a specific question from, I believe, Councilmember Watton yesterday, I did look back at the EIS. It lists the projects that were considered as part of this. It's the ones that were at the time reasonably anticipated to move forward. And so the Highway 18 expansion over Tiger Summit is not included because this analysis was originally done several years ago.
Thank you.
We'll get into further discussion of this later. There are 2 conditions of approval associated with transportation because of the comprehensive plan requirement and the code requirements for concurrency. One, condition 38 would address the Fisher Avenue intersection it would require the applicant to pay their proportional, their pro rata share for improvements to Fisher Avenue. And then condition 40 would address impacts of the full build out. So it would require, first of all, more analysis of the impacts of the development throughout the city's roadway network. And then looking at a number of improvements, which I have already described. For example, replacement and expansion of the 202 bridge, expansion of the Tolko roundabout, a roundabout at 99th and the Parkway, just being some examples of those improvements.
Councilmember Holloway.
It's just, I guess put this on the list. So I'm maybe for it's from exposure to the analysis. So I'm curious of how the additional traffic load from the mill site affects Fisher Avenue. I understand the increased traffic load coming through. What I don't understand is how the interchange at Highway 18, which is a significant distance away, which is a drain of the traffic, will have an effect on that intersection, alleviating the additional load. I mean, if that load is going to pile up, it'll pile up down by the interchange. So if there are some explanations behind that, I'd love to hear it at a later date.
Oh, I mean, I can give you the basic answer now if you'd like. The short answer is that because Fisher is an unsignalized intersection and the predominant traffic, of course, is east-west on Snoqualmie Parkway, the specific impact is turning movements coming off of Fisher, trying to make, say, a left turn from Fisher onto the Parkway. That's where the level of service declines to level F. Through traffic on the Parkway maintains a very high level of service there. So to fix that deficiency, you'd have to add turn lanes, for example. Eventually, you're going to need a full signal at Fisher. So that's the short version, what the DEIS is saying.
Peace, and I understand how that is negatively affected, excuse me. But the mitigation statement was that the Highway 18 interchange will alleviate that to some extent. I'm curious of how that gets alleviated from Highway 18, from the interchange.
So looking specifically at the level of service of the, because there's actually multiple intersections at the I-90 SR18 interchange. There's the one as you come down the Parkway, then there's the further one from the eastbound off ramps. So there's two specifically. The Diverging Diamond project would result in a level of service that is not a failure. Because right now, of course, we have bad traffic there. Those intersections are failing, especially during PM peak.
Those intersections by Highway 18.
Correct. The two at the westbound off ramp and westbound on ramp, and then of course the one at the eastbound leg south of the interchange. Those are the two intersections that currently exist. Mm-hmm. Those two without the project would of course degrade even further. That would be a significant environmental impact. WashDOT's interchange project to build the Diverging Diamond is going to increase capacity through the interchange through that design and result in a level of service that meets the city's concurrency standards. Therefore, that would mitigate the significant environmental impact that the project could create at that.
Maybe I'm making a linkage that isn't there. To be clear, I thought I read this to understand that the interchange at Highway 18 and I-90 would mitigate the Fisher Avenue interchange as far as its impact. So I'm curious how that intersection all the way over across the hill affects Fisher.
And it doesn't specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, there are separate impacts, if you will. So they need to be mitigated in different ways. The specific impact at the interchange is mitigated by the interchange project. The Fisher Avenue impact needs to be mitigated in different ways through, like I said, channelization, adding turn lanes on Fisher, for example, eventually adding a full signal at Fisher so that people can make that left turn out of Fisher, especially during peak hours.
Councilor Watton.
You mentioned that, Mr. Rogers, you mentioned that the applicant is proposing 3,500 or so jobs. Is trying to put it in perspective, where do those numbers come from? Is it based on the projected activities, the number of square feet that could potentially be developed? And is that like the high end of the range, I guess, is the other thing?
So and the DEIS will, provides the detail behind this, but what they're doing is they're taking, so there's typical ratios of jobs per square foot for different land uses, say office or warehouse. So, for an office use, you'll have approximately one job for every 250 square feet. For a warehouse, it's going to be closer to, 1 per 800 square feet or 1 per 1,000 square feet. We can look and see what the exact numbers they used were because those are listed in the DEIS. But that's how you translate the physical square footage they're proposing to build to a number of jobs.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. There's a formula behind it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Benson?
So then I have kind of two questions on that. The builder isn't creating the jobs, he's just creating the space for the jobs, right? I understand that correctly, yeah. And then on the Fisher Creek, you mentioned that the builder would be responsible for paying for their portion of the improvement, the light or whatever.
Right.
And is there, I assume there's some kind of formula where you figure out that right now we're at 50% of the way to needing that light and they're gonna push us over so they'd pay half? Just throwing numbers out there.
But yeah, you're exactly right. They would be negotiated. There will be a formula because say they're responsible for, like I said, maybe half the impact. And so they pay half of whatever the improvement is, or maybe it's 25%. So, but that would be more specifically noted in the development agreement.
Okay, great.
And it's in planning area 2 or 3, right? Not necessarily planning area 1 for the Fisher Creek light.
The light would, yeah, correct. The light would be for planning areas 2 and 3. Some of the other improvements would be, like I said, turn lanes would be earlier for planning area 1 because of the deficiencies we'd see.
Yeah, it's already hard to turn left there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so for utilities, we have a comprehensive plan policy to ensure there's sufficient water and wastewater or sewer capacity is available to support plan development on the mill site. And so to ensure conformance with this particular policy, there are 4 conditions of approval that would require the applicant to confirm or reconfirm the availability of water and also ensure that sufficient wastewater capacity is in place. We can talk about this more when we get to conditions of approval, but I at least want to highlight this policy for the council at this time. I think we've discussed previously, and this is also in the application documents in the EIS, the city presently has sufficient water to develop planning area 1, and development of planning areas 2 and 3 would require development of additional water sources on the part of the city. And as you know, the city is currently underway with that process. So that's the comprehensive plan. Now we can get to the conditions of approval. There are 50 total conditions of approval that were recommended by staff and the hearing examiner. The majority of these conditions, 39 of the 50, are environmental mitigations that come straight out of the environmental impact statement. These were developed by the city's expert consultants. And these include disciplines such as critical areas and site contamination, stormwater, transportation, utilities. So we've discussed several of these previously. We can go into a little more detail now, and I'll provide some highlights for you. So you can follow on condition number 21, discusses the site contamination. We talked about this yesterday with the site contamination. This condition is going to require the applicant to work through the Model Toxic Control Act process with the Department of Ecology. You recall the graphic from ecology that shows the steps in that process. And so this is, it's environmental mitigation, but it's formalizing working through the site contamination issues.
That's what I say.
Looking at condition of approval 21, that refers to planning areas 2 and 3. What about planning area 1?
Based on the analysis that's in the EIS and the testimony from the applicant's experts, there's not contamination in planning area 1. Now, certainly, ecology is going to have to sign off on that formally because ecology did the site hazard assessment for the entire site. But based on the analysis we've seen in the testimony from the experts, there is no reason to suspect contamination in planning area 1 because of the historic activities that occurred in planning area 1, which is to say lumber storage. They didn't have, major lumber facilities there. There wasn't, a vehicle maintenance pad or anything like that.
But I guess, was there if I can follow up, so was there not a environmental assessment done of that area? Or is it just because it was declared that there weren't activities that would create it?
It was clear there weren't, based on what's in the EIS and the expert testimony, there were not activities there that could have created contamination. And they did a number of test borings also throughout planning area 1. And they didn't find anything there.
Those test borings in the document somewhere?
There's direct testimony to that from the applicant. And then there's also information on where they did the borings and the results of those borings in the EIS.
Councilor Watton?
So just for clarification, Mr. Rogers, the total project has gone through a phase 1 on the environmental, with the first phase being at least a phase 2 on environmental with the drillings?
I'm hesitant to attribute it to specific phases, but the applicant has done, if you will, some site exploration of the entire site, and so they've done borings throughout the site, including in planning area 1 and 2 and 3.
Okay.
Looked at all the historical information available, because Weyerhaeuser documented a lot of contamination, and Weyerhaeuser did some cleanup a number of years ago. So the applicant and the city have all those documents. And then Ecology has done a site hazard assessment. So they've taken all that in and said, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. We need to clean this up.
Okay, thank you.
Borings, drillings.
Councilor Christensen? Thanks.
I just had a question. A number of the mitigation measures for air quality, water resources, plants, animals, things like that, basically state that the mitigation will be completed where it's to the extent feasible, basically, which is a little bit hard to quantify. Who's determining whether, I guess, how far their steps have to go on each of these measures?
They will go so this will be, many of this ends up being a bit of an iterative, not a bit, it is an iterative process between the applicant and their experts and the city on many of these things. And then where necessary, we'll be bringing in state agencies, for example. Say we're working some of the wetland mitigation, I'm sure Ecology and Fish and Wildlife will be involved. And so, there are certainly situations where somebody's going to say, look, there's no way you can go in and actually make, say, creating this wetland buffer happen because I don't know why there's all sorts of rocks everywhere and nothing's ever going to grow appropriately. And then the question becomes, and this is a hypothetical, mind you, is it better to dig everything out and put better dirt in to actually make it happen, or would it be better to adjust the plans a little bit to accommodate that? So that's an example of how we determine what at the end of the day is feasible, because it's one thing to look at the plan at the level we're at, this PCI plan, and another to get directly into construction documents and the mitigation plans. So that feasibility is, we have the city, that is, we have the codes and state law behind us to say, look, there's a requirement to do it this way, and the applicant would need to prove we can't do it that way and so we need to do something else.
Okay, and so what would that process look like then? I just want to make sure that we're not in a situation where the applicant says, hey, I'm going to do all of these fantastic things, and then they're like, oh, well, this costs a little bit more. I don't feel inclined to do that.
That's handled through the construction permit review process, and so they'll apply for, say, a clearing and grading permit and some building permits, and then the city staff reviews those, and we'll review those against the PCI plan, the EIS, all these documents that we've generated, and of course the council, if the council does approve it, against the council's approval and whatever conditions of approval come with it. So it is city staff doing it.
Okay.
But like I said, we have codes and laws to back us up on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Watton?
So just clarify and follow up to that, building permits need to be preceded by the completion of the cleanup, right? And the approval of the State Department of Ecology before permits are issued. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Counselor Christensen?
As a point of clarification for each of the individual planning areas,
Right.
because they'll be operating separately as we go.
Right. It's likely that this will be a phased cleanup as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right, highlight another condition. Condition number 23 discusses development of lighting standards. And this is something the council, of course, discussed a couple weeks ago when talking about deviations and for the lighting standards. So you can see there is a condition related to lighting standards. And there's a further condition earlier on that also talks about the lighting standards and some of the things that these lighting standards will need to conform with, the dark sky initiative, for example.
Counselor Christensen?
I had a question on the last sentence in number 23, condition 23. It says that the guidelines shall be amended prior to applying for building permits in planning areas 2 and 3 to provide an equivalent level of detail as is provided for planning area 1. I'm assuming that that's the additional detail that we're going to be seeing in the development agreement as opposed to the level of detail we're having now. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, this is 22.
22, yes, the last sentence.
Yes, because, as we've discussed, we have a relatively high level of detail for planning area 1 right now. And, we know roughly where the building footprints are, how big they'll be. We don't know that for planning areas 2 and 3 right now. And so as the applicant moves through the cleanup process and then getting, an actual design ready for 2 and 3, the design guidelines may very well need to be amended to accommodate that. And so that they'll have to come back and make that happen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to suss out, because it says that we'll need the equivalent level of detail it's provided for planning area 1, but at this point, we don't really have any detail for the lighting aspect.
Right.
So I'm just confirming that the time that we're measuring the appropriate or equivalent level of details further down the road, right?
Correct.
So when they're determining lighting for the next 2 sections, they'll have more information than what we have currently for 1.
Right. And again, I think the development agreement will have some more specific about the process for these future approvals, leading into development of, actual on the ground development of 2 and 3.
Okay, thank you.
Right. There are a number of conditions about transportation, some of which we previously discussed, and these require, as I said before, the applicant to pay their pro rata share, their proportional share for various roadway improvements where the project would create impacts. They also have to develop, in addition to that, they would need to develop a construction management plan for the construction traffic and all the trucks that's going to bring. And then, they would have to the businesses rather would need to comply with the Commute Trip Reduction Act to try to, reduce single occupant vehicle driving, encourage biking, van pools, things like that.
Counselor Christensen?
I'm sorry. I had a question. It wasn't on traffic, but it was on actually number 34. They talk about a potential historic district in planning area 3. I was just wondering if you could give any additional information. Is that specifically related to cultural events from Japanese?
So that one is related. So planning area 3 includes a significant number of the historic mill buildings, the powerhouse being one example, but also some of the old mill structures that are still in existence. And so the one thing that has been explored is, instead of designated necessarily individual buildings one by one, would be to designate an entire historic district that encompasses all these historic resources. So that's separate from the Japanese camp issue, and you see that in the conditions as well. The Japanese camp was located further to the west, roughly next to the lake in what is today the floodway. There are separate conditions that address the Japanese camp issue, because the brief summary is there was a Japanese camp. Those people were all interned at the start of World War II with everybody else on the West Coast of Japanese American descent. And so they very, very hurriedly and quickly abandoned those facilities, and to our understanding, threw various implements, pots, pans, and other things into holes in the ground. So there are some measures here to address those historic impacts and cultural impacts.
Councilor Johnson?
So then getting back to traffic, there are a couple of spots that are going to be on Snoqualmie Parkway that it sounds like the developers would be responsible for helping with improvements to mitigate impacts, correct?
Correct.
So I'm curious, just to what degree does that process, would that process interface with the city versus with the state? And to what degree will the state uphold requirements if we're not responsible for the road, but they are? Does that make sense?
No, I understand what you're asking. I think, so far what we've heard from the state is that, and this goes for other state highways running through local jurisdictions, is they're certainly willing to work with us on improvements, and so long as, to an extent, if they're not funding the improvements, it's not that they don't care, but they're definitely willing to work with us on, and project developers on needed improvements to roadways. So some of the ones you see in the list here, for example, installing a roundabout at 99th and Snoqualmie Parkway, certainly WashDOT's going to be involved because that's right next to the interchange that they're about to build. So they will be intimately involved. But again, WashDOT, they'll make their preferences known. Where they may say, no, we really, really, really want a light there instead, and so we'd have to work with them on that. Or they may say, no, we want this big, multi-lane roundabout there to accommodate the traffic. We'll work with them to make that happen. And the applicant will have to work with them as well.
Councilor Johnson?
And similarly, it talks about the idea of bike infrastructure. I'm not sure how many bike lanes there currently are on Fisher. Probably not many. But there's some fantastic designs out there for bike lanes at intersections that are really cool. And it's something that we could explore, but to what degree, if we decide to go that route, taking the opportunity that intersection could be redeveloped, to what degree would the onus be on them to make those improvements that are not technically already there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that would end up being an interesting discussion with WashDOT, because certainly WashDOT has standards for intersection design that could include bicycle facilities, but how that interacts with the city's adopted standards for roads that were built in Snoqualmie Ridge and Snoqualmie Ridge 2, and then how you relate that to, well, how many bicycles do we have going through these intersections? I think will be an interesting discussion of, well, what do we do? I think it's difficult to speculate at this point in time as to what there's, because of course the parkway itself doesn't have bicycle facilities. It's not built that way, and we rely on the trail that's on the north side of the parkway for the non-motorized users, the pedestrians and the bicycles. So sorry to not give a straight answer. I just think that it's not, we can't really answer that question, and certainly there's nothing in the record to indicate one way or another how that would result.
But is that something they can add? So you just said to the development agreement, or?
It's something we could certainly, the council can certainly consider adding some additional language. I think we'd have to look carefully at the EIS, because the EIS has analysis about non-motorized transportation and users. And so we'd have to look back to see, well, how many cyclists are we talking about, and do we consider it an impact or not? It may be, the mayor's right, it may be better suited to the development agreement, understanding that there's an interaction with WashDOT that needs to occur here, and we don't know what WashDOT's reaction might be.
We can just follow up. Yeah, I think that sounds more like a development agreement thing. Thanks.
All right, so there are 4 conditions, and these are numbers 46 through 49 that talk about utilities. As has been discussed, and it's in the application, the applicant is proposing to construct wineries. Wineries can generate very high loads on the city's wastewater plant through, it's usually the BODs here. And so to address that, the applicant would need to either construct, there's a condition that says this, either construct pre-treatment facilities or pay a pro rata share for improvements to the city's wastewater plant. So that's directly there. And then there's two other conditions that address water. One says reconfirm water availability for planning area 1 prior to issuance of any construction permits, building permits. And the second says we need to find the water for planning areas 2 and 3 before you can get any construction permits there. So that's where we're really, nailing that one down on the utility side.
Councilor Watton?
So in regards to phase 2 and 3, as it relates to the water, whose responsibility is that? Is that the applicants at this point? Is it the city? Is it cooperation between the two?
So the city's water system, updated water system plan talks about the city's efforts to acquire more water, and there's testimony in the record about this as well. It is largely on the city to do that. Now, we've been working with the applicant a little bit, but the city has projects underway, the ASR, the Aquifer Storage and Recharge project. This would be more efficient use of the city's existing water supplies that would let us use more, for one example. And so that's how we're looking to get more water.
Okay, thank you.
So then the last of the environmental mitigation related conditions is number 50, and this requires the applicant to pay their proportionate share of the cost of a ladder truck. And this is due to the height deviation request, the up to 75-foot tall building. Fire department doesn't have a ladder truck. They would have no way of reaching up into a structure that high. We'd have to call East Side Fire and Rescue to bring their ladder truck from Issaquah. So while they wouldn't be paying for all of it, they would pay their share of it.
Councilor Watton? Oh, Councilor Vincent?
And would their share of it be a percentage of the buildings requiring a ladder truck?
I think the exact determination is, again, something that would end up in the development agreement to figure out, well, how do you determine their proportionate share? Maybe it's that. Maybe it's another calculation based on, we're projecting X number of calls for service that would require it. And so they get, maybe it's 20% of the calls, hypothetically. But it's subject to negotiation, certainly.
Councilor Johnson?
Could such costs also go into ongoing additional operating costs rather than just the upfront cost of the truck itself? If there was going to be additional cost to operating it, because it could be called out there, could there be an ongoing thing with that?
That's something to be negotiated through the development agreement, I would say. SEPA doesn't generally provide a good way of approaching ongoing operating costs in Mayor 6 because so for one, the project will generate a tax revenue for the city, which will help, and that alone will help offset the cost of the services, the police, the fire. And there is analysis of this. There's a section in the EIS that talks about public facilities and public services. And so it runs the calculation of, well, how much tax revenue would it generate? What's the cost here? So to an extent that is taken into account. Beyond that, if I think if the council wanted more, there's obviously an opportunity to negotiate that on an ongoing basis.
Councilor Holloway?
So we currently have capacity in our utilities to handle the water requirements for phase 1. We do not have water rights sufficient to cover phase 2 and 3. How is the cost of the development of those additional water rights covered?
The city has the process underway to acquire those and develop them now. And so as you can see, the EIS isn't calling for the applicant to pay a proportional share. The condition states that they need to confirm the availability of water prior to getting construction permits. So again, now the city wanted to ask the applicant to help offset some of that cost. That's something for the development agreement to consider. And, because the council can certainly ask that. Certainly there's history, the Weyerhaeuser Real Estate Development Company for Snoqualmie Ridge 1 brought water supplies with them and built us a sewer plant. So, that was obviously a very, very, very large development, which, tripled the size of the city population or something along those lines. So that's the precedent there. This is a different scale of development relative to the size of the city at this point, but it's something that could be discussed further.
Councilor Watton.
And as a follow-on to that discussion, and is that where impact fees would help offset some of the additional costs of acquiring the water rights, or is that a totally separate issue?
Impact fees start getting into a different type of discussion because the city would need to have, prior to this plan application being submitted, have done a significant amount of work identifying, first of all, what capital facilities we have and where development would create deficiencies in those capital facilities. And then the city could turn around and charge impact fees for a certain portion of those deficiencies. The city does not today have a deficiency. And so there's nothing to charge the impact fee for just maintaining our current system. Now, for expanding the system, if the development would create a deficiency, that's where the impact fee could come into play. But like I said, that moment is already passed because we have an application in front of us.
Okay, thank
Well,
you.
we have an application for, sorry, Chair.
Councilor Holloway.
We have an application for planning area 1. Those impact fees could be applicable for 2 and 3?
But potentially, yes, but I think the, impact fee, for better or worse, impact fees gets into a very, very different type of discussion, which the council again could have, because, we can charge impact fees for a range of things, transportation. We charge school impact fees through the school district, of course. Parks is another one that's common. So that discussion can certainly occur. But with what's right in front of us here and now.
Yeah, for planning area 1.
Yeah.
We're good.
And they would have GFCs is whenever they hook up.
Yeah, and the mayor's right. One condition 48 actually specifies this project needs to pay GFCs. So we'll certainly be getting those. And that's the usual approach to paying for utility infrastructure is the GFC process, and less so than on the impact fees. So our plans identify the facilities we need. We charge GFCs accordingly.
Correct, that's the only correction I want to make was those GFCs are calculated for the existing plan. If there's capacity requirements beyond the plan, you could either adjust the GFCs or we could do impact. It's a conversation between concurrency and impact fees, how you handle it, but that's a later discussion.
Yes.
I would just point out there are only certain impact fees in the state statute. Water utility isn't one of them, so you would find different ways, such as your GFC or in the development agreement, finding ways to do that, to do what you needed.
Thank you.
So the other 11 conditions that we haven't spoken of yet, and these are actually numerically numbers 1 through 11, are related to future permits and approvals, design guidelines, and wetland monitoring. And these are the conditions that were developed by city staff to address specific issues that aren't necessarily environmental issues, but things that are related to the plan approval. Condition 1 is the one that would place limits on the total development in planning area 1. So to Councilmember Lasay's question the other day about the number of residential units, this condition says up to 160 units and 470,000 square feet of commercial development, and it has the use breakdown for warehouse and retail and light industrial. So that's where you find that limitation. These conditions would also require the development of design guidelines for the project. And so as Councilmember Christensen was noting, certainly they'll be focused on planning area 1 at first, because that's the one that would get built first, that has a higher level of detail. As part of these conditions, adherence to the design guidelines would be determined by the CD director, the community development director, and this review and approval would constitute design review for the project. So these buildings would not go to the city's design review board, which is the planning commission. This would be, if you will, administrative design review, which is similar to the process that is used already for Snoqualmie Ridge. All the buildings in the neighborhood center along Center Boulevard and all the buildings in the business park were reviewed through what is effectively an administrative design review process. The council approved design guidelines and development standards for development in these areas and told staff, the city administration, go implement it. And we have done that over the last 25 years. There's a condition that would also specifies that these design guidelines need to incorporate provisions from the conditional use permit process for performance standards on things such as air quality and vibration and glare. And this is in direct relation to the deviation request, where the applicant is requesting to not have to go through the conditional use permit process, but we wanted to put those things into the design guidelines so that we are still getting the level of analysis that we would otherwise get. So even though the council would be saying, yes, you can have these, the design guidelines are still going to incorporate those CUP criteria for the community development director to review when the buildings get proposed.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, could you just say one more time why it would be the community development director rather than the planning commission would be satisfying the role of the design review board for this?
By having the community development director do this review and approval, it creates what would be known as administrative design review. So they don't have to go back through a review process by one of the city's boards or commissions, in this case, the planning commission. This provides, the applicant prefers this because it provides for them a somewhat greater level of certainty as to they can propose something that meets the standards, and this community development director will work directly with them on these. Rather than having to go through this much more public process with the design review board. The other reason for this is that it lets, if you look at the buildings that are built in the business park, for example, today, all of those went through what is effectively administrative design review. It's called mixed use consistency review. And so the director worked closely with the applicant's architects, and we have our consultants too, our architectural consultants, to help work through this long list of design requirements and get these buildings that adhere to that. This is, and like I said, administrative design review effectively has been used by this city for Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2 and the Kimmel Creek Village plan, and was approved by the council for the Salish expansion as well.
Councilor Johnson.
I'm sure it's fine, it's all in the up and up. Since this particular code is referenced, I assume that code is part of the record, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I just didn't see a provision for actually doing that, and maybe I just missed it. So I'm assuming that it's fine somehow. I just didn't see where it's actually stated in the code that you can do that.
So condition number 3 specifically says that a determination of substantial conformance by the CD director shall satisfy the requirements of Chapter 1780 Design Review Board. But then if you look at the condition above, number 2, and then subsection C, it says the development, in determining substantial conformance, the CD director shall also be guided by, and subsection C says the development and design guidelines required by these other conditions. So there's a specific reference there to say, this is what needs to be looked at, these design guidelines, and here's how the director is going to actually do this.
But there is.
Councilor Holloway.
Sorry. There are provisions in the code for administrative review versus planning commission review. I think that's the essence of his question, is you're calling out administrative review. This is covered in our current city code. Administrative review is a tool that we use.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in there. You may take it as a note in the matrix of what code specifically calls that out, but we've done that on a couple of items.
Okay.
Councilor Johnson.
Okay. It could just be that I missed it. I just would like that somehow referenced then, like what is the code that allows it?
Yeah, we'll get that. And then finally, there is a condition in there, number 11, to ensure an appropriate wetland mitigation and monitoring plan is in place. And this is due to the wetland buffer work that is being requested in this PCI plan. We mentioned this before. They're doing they're proposing this pretty substantial deviation for what is effectively buffer averaging. That comes with it a requirement to have an appropriate mitigation plan in place per the city's critical areas code, and then an appropriate length of time for the monitoring. And that can be, and that's determined by the city's experts. So, usually these are in 5, 10, 15-year increments. In the case, we have history of some very, very lengthy wetland monitoring as part of the Snoqualmie Ridge project. They are still doing wetland monitoring today, even though construction on some of these started almost 20 years ago. So in this case, because of the 10 to 15-year build out proposed for the mill site, the wetland monitoring is likely to extend a significant length of time commensurate with the work they're doing.
Oh, Councilor Christensen.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact that it specifically states that it's regardless of the success of the project, that at least my understanding of it was that they'd have to continue to comply with the wetland mitigation and monitoring plan. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. My other question had to do with condition number 9. It talks about required screening, and it says it's a minimum of 10 feet wide. And it's an evergreen planting area with screen planting to a minimum of 7 feet above grade. Is that standard for what the city would typically require for screening? Because I didn't think that 10 feet was particularly deep or would
Well, let me look at the
screen much.
Let me look at the code here. Landscape. So the city's landscape code will generally require screening of varying. Here, let me show this one. Wait for it. Let me unpause, resume share that. So this is the city's landscaping code, and you can see what it generally requires. And so you have a subject property zone. In this case, it would be this one, commercial industrial. And the widths are determined by what the abutting use is. So an abutting compatible use, meaning a more commercial industrial, requires a 10-foot wide landscape strip. If you're next to single family residential, it requires this 30-foot wide, and type 1 is a full screen. You can't see through it. Abutting, you can see how it moves on through, parks and open space is 20 feet. So 10 feet is relatively standard. In this case, there are also significant, let me switch back to this and find the right. Let me find the right slide here. As you can see in the plan here, there are also significant open space areas. And so we have a much bigger screen, say along the north side here next to wetland 12 than just the 10 feet. And so you will certainly have some narrower areas, here along the northwest side adjacent to the Hall Road. Immediately across the way here is the city's wastewater plant. So that would require a 10-foot screening buffer anyway because it's a utility park. And then you, of course, on this side next to the river have some pretty significant screening areas already. So while there's a minimum 10-foot that's specified, in the condition and would be built into the guidelines, functionally, that's really only going to apply at least for planning area 1, little places. Now, certainly in planning areas 2 and 3, there could be, that will be looked at when they get to the point of developing those planning areas, because there may be areas where it will be necessary to provide a bigger buffer, say on the eastern side of those planning areas next to the Snoqualmie Valley Trail.
Yeah. That's one of the concerns. Okay.
Councilor Holloway.
So kind of 2 questions. There is a request for deviation, I think, to 70 feet. Was there any consideration on the tree buffer height, reflect that change in building height?
No, I don't believe so. The city's code by default has standards for how high when you plant the trees, how tall they need to be. And typically what we'll see, and we can put this in the design guidelines, is how tall they need to grow within a certain number of years, so they'll provide simulations of here's what planted, here's at 10 years, here's at 15 years, and on up. the aesthetic analysis that's in the EIS also, of course, is looking at views both onto and off of the site. And many of the views are screened by trees that are already in existence today, both on and off the site.
Okay, my second question is, taking a look at the map, particularly around where the traffic circle is, the screening gets awful thin. I understand the opinion that it's not visible from across the river, but having driven that road and seeing that map, I might have a differing opinion. How do we get out of opinion and into what would really be visible from different, with a 70-foot roof?
I think that's where the aesthetic analysis in the DEIS is really, that's the hard information we have here as to what would be visible from where. There is some, I believe there's some testimony that's somewhat on point to this as well that we can look up that occurred during the public hearing. Shows that the site is certainly visible from the Tokal area to the northeast, the Tokal neighborhood. It's visible, if you go up the hill enough.
You're looking down on it,
yeah, right, from the casino, you can certainly see down onto the site. The site is largely screened from view from the parkway because of trees. It shows the DEIS
Up at the top of the parkway.
Yeah, the DEIS show it runs what's called a topographic viewshed analysis, which is to say, if literally just bare land, where could you see this? And it looks like a lot because it is a lot, but then you add the trees into the equation and you suddenly can't see it. You can get little peekaboo views of the smokestack, and you can see parts of the roof of the planer shed, which is 55 feet tall, from certain areas of the parkway if you're coming down the parkway, but largely you can't see the site because of the trees. And a lot of the trees that are providing the screening are in open space areas in Snoqualmie Ridge, so those won't go away, or they're on parcels that are subject to conservation easements. So the parcel at the bottom of the parkway between 202 and the river, that's subject to a conservation easement. That's providing a lot of the screening from that side as an example. And then of course areas along the river town over toward the site, both on and off of the site. So the DEIS is showing that you're not really going to see this site. I mean, it's not going to be completely invisible, but the impacts, the DEIS is saying that the visual impacts are being mitigated by all this vegetation.
Is that map, did I miss it in the material here?
It's in the DEIS and we can find where that is.
Can you put it on the list and
Yeah.
just show us that map at some time? Thank you. I mean, we're not gonna mitigate, if you can see dirt now from on top of the parkway, you're not gonna mitigate that between now and then.
I mean, a 7-foot tree is not gonna mitigate a 70-foot high building.
Yeah.
So it'll be visible.
Councilor Christensen?
I was just gonna ask also, is it possible to get information on which video it is, the testimony that related to I guess, where the project will be visible?
Yeah, we can find where that is, and we can get both the video and then we identify in the transcript for you from which experts were testifying and when.
Okay, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, that'd be good.
Councilor Johnson?
One more question about views. From the Railroad Avenue Bridge, is there any discussion on record about the view from there, since there can be some potential pedestrian crossing related to people walking on it? When they look down the river, it sure looks to me like that's a head-on view right at some of these buildings. So, that could be a little bit immersion breaking from the river. So that's just one spot where I'm not sure that there's any significant vegetation in the way.
Right. So this map I have on the screen, this is from the DEIS. This is exhibit 3.9.4 in the DEIS. I don't have a page reference, unfortunately, handy, but this shows where the view analysis was conducted, the visual points. You can see the 202 bridge was actually included in there, to your question, Councilmember Johnson. And you can see the other points, the casino was included, the falls observation deck.
There it goes.
Over at the, where the Snoqualmie Valley Trail crosses the river there at Reinig Road. So, the DEIS will describe, they have simulations in there of what can you see, assuming the developed condition of the site.
So what does the green mean, for instance?
Oh, in this one, the green is just showing some of the open space areas that are present. So, for example, you can see Meadowbrook Farm is on there, the open space areas that are.
The line, though. The line.
Oh,
The green, the blue,
I'm
the
sorry.
red.
Those are showing. So the red outline is planning area 1, the blue one is 2, and the green is 3.
Councilor Say?
So I'll tread carefully here, because if this is what is in the record, it's unfortunate that what's in the record doesn't include all of the lands that are elevated above the mill site. If you take the parkway up to, from that point at, from 202 Bridge up the parkway to I-90, there's nothing there representing what you'll see. And I know of several parks on Snoqualmie Ridge that look down through the valley, and I would have liked to have seen a view of what that would look like. Because that's it, to me, it's not mitigating when you're next to it, because you're there, you're next to it. It's expected. It's what you're mitigating is when you're away. We have a nice new high school that dominates the landscape from elevated views up on Snoqualmie Ridge. And this didn't address any of that.
And the other thing we can look for, Councilmember Lassay, is to see if there is testimony on point to that. So that would be information in the record. You're certainly right that what you're seeing done in the DES does not include any simulation or look from vantage points along Snoqualmie Parkway. There may have been testimony addressing that we'll take a look for.
Yeah, because Community Park is a great example. Stand up on Community Park at the upper ball field, soccer field.
Councilmember, I would just caution against adding to the record at this point with your personal observations. That might be better for deliberation, argument on those points.
I'll ask for just to have staff check what was on the record and what was discussed, and if you can provide links to the either transcripts or recordings, it'd be good to hear what that is, without having to fall asleep trying to get into the middle of it.
Absolutely.
And yes, I did see that the Snoqualmie Casino was addressed, but why would you address Snoqualmie Casino and not everything else?
It just may be a comparable, elevation-wise, the angle's different, but it may be a comparable.
Councilor Holloway?
That was my comment.
I will say the analysis certainly shows that from Snoqualmie Casino, due to its height above the site and the angle it's at, you can absolutely see onto the Snoqualmie Mill site from the casino. And so you would see, you can see the smokestack today, you can see the planer building, you would absolutely see elements of this development from the casino. That's what it shows. The EIS indicates that the visual impacts are not considered significant based on the analysis that's in there.
Councilor Christensen?
And it's my understanding that the tribe was notified and that they did not put forth an opposition to this, correct? I believe there was some public comment from someone raising concerns about the tribe, but the tribe did not itself respond. Is that accurate?
The tribe provided comment on the draft EIS. Their comment letter was lengthy, and I don't, off the top of my head, recall all of the issues they addressed in that. We could certainly look, but their comment, their draft EIS comment is part of the final EIS and therefore is in the record, so we can certainly look at that. And you're right, there was a member of the public commented on issues related to the Snoqualmie tribe in their public comment at the public hearing, so we can look at that one as well.
Councilor Say?
Just to follow up on that, I believe in the record, if I remember reading through, there was, I'm not going to say one way or the other, but there were letters and items from the tribe related to this, if I do remember when I was reading through some of the documentation. So there are statements and or items of I'm not going to use the wrong word. I'm just going to say there are items in the record from the tribe.
So it's going to go on the matrix to,
Yes.
Yeah, if you could
absolutely.
direct us to those two.
Thank you.
All right, so let me go back. So that concludes what I had for presentation on walking through the conditions of approval. I can certainly take more questions. The last thing I at least want to address with the council is to look back at the schedule. The council has moved quite efficiently through this review, and I know that the council expressed a desire to have deliberation time coming up. As you recall, we have a number of meetings still scheduled. We have, of course, the rest of tonight scheduled. We have a special meeting on Tuesday, the 23rd of August, another special meeting on Thursday, September 8th. That's a bit of a different one. Thursday, September 13th, and then action, of course, on Monday, September 26th. What we're looking at doing is bringing the development agreement, it's not shown on here, but we would bring the development agreement to the council for introduction on Thursday, September 8th. We're still working through that development agreement, reviewing it internally. We need to, of course, talk with the applicant more about that. So we're going to work on that and get it ready in a month for you. There'll be a public hearing on that development agreement on September 12th. But with all that said, we have a significant amount of time still built into the schedule for the council to deliberate and have further discussion. And so we're looking for hopefully some indication from the council now as to your pleasure with regard to this schedule. If you think you want to keep the schedule and continue deliberations, if you want to decide you don't need all this time, but it's really up to the council to decide. I know the mayor, of course, has some thoughts to share as well, I think. Or do you not?
well, I still have a comment on the 11 that we just looked at, right? The 11 different conditions. So those are
yeah.
the city conditions, is that correct? They're not the EIS conditions?
Correct.
And so those can remain here, we can approve them, or they can be part of the development agreement. So for instance, if you state, I want 165 apartments, then you can actually change it to 165 versus keeping it at 160, things like that. So just so you know, there is some flexibility on some of those items that you could include in the development agreement or just keep where they are and approve them in that area. But
And if the council wanted to start, adjusting some of these condition language, that's certainly a good topic for further deliberations because there would be concerns about the environmental analysis done in the EIS and how that might relate to some adjustment here. So we're certainly open to that discussion and for moving things in or out of conditions of approval into the development agreement, or certainly rewriting some of these conditions if the council has the desire to change how some of them are written or to add additional things in.
So council member Lasay?
So I'm going to ask something different than that. Maybe it's more of a housekeeping item to assist others too, is that I'm routinely flipping between the hearing examiner references and conclusions and the staff report references and conclusions, and I'm trying to determine what is different. I would like a little bit of maybe education on the timeline of how those were prepared, and whether I would find something in the staff report to the hearing examiner that would be different than what is in the hearing examiner's findings, conclusions, and decisions, so I know which, or should I focus on all of these conditions in one of these documents, not the other?
So I can certainly tell you that all 50 conditions are identical between the staff report and a hearing examiner's decision. The difference between the documents ultimately is that the staff report, of course, started from a point of we had the application, we had not had the public hearing, and the SEPA appeal process. So the hearing examiner's report adopts all the various findings and conclusions of the staff report by reference. And so you'll see, the hearing examiner will say, I adopt staff report conclusions X through X in some places. The examiner then also wrote and adopted a number of additional findings and conclusions to support the various things that happened through the public hearing. She has findings about the number of public comments and what those public comments say. There are conclusions about, in relation, responding to this testimony versus this expert testimony, the examiner concludes why. So that's where the functional difference between the two comes in. They do work together. Now, moving forward, I think what we are likely to see, and unfortunately the city attorney Sturbank isn't here tonight to add some color to this, but what we would likely be looking to do is creating a separate findings, conclusions, conditions document for the council to adopt via resolution that would include all these things laid out. So we're not referring back and forth to various documents, and creating some of the confusion that Councilmember Lissay is speaking to, that it's hard to jump back and forth all the time.
And if I can follow up on that real quick, that would be post deliberations.
Correct.
Councilmember, I would say if you're looking for something that's talking about witness credibility or what a witness testified about, I would look in the hearing examiner recommendation, because that was done afterwards.
It's there.
I understand that part. I have seen that. I get that part. I was just trying to reconcile the conditions, and Jason touched on it perfectly, to make sure that when I'm looking at, basically it comes down, because I've been taking notes in one section and realized, oh crud, should I be taking it in another section?
Right. No, I started off doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Councilor Johnson?
With regard to the schedule, if the development agreement that comes to us doesn't have a lot of the things that we've talked about before, especially the things that we had a little bit more broad agreement on, it would seem like, from reading tea leaves, then that makes that timeline really tight. If we're then coming back and saying, okay, but we had a bunch of things that it seemed like we had some agreement on that we wanted to see in there, and if staff didn't go through that process now, with the development agreement draft that they bring to us at that time, then that would slow things down. So I guess what I'm trying to say is perhaps try to bring those things in to that draft to the best of staff's ability to expedite things.
No, you're certainly correct. And that's a situation where, in some respects, the council having deliberations on the 23rd may actually be very helpful to staff, to the administration, as we negotiate this development agreement, the initial draft at least, because we will then be able to hear the council's deliberations and we've obviously been taking notes, but to hear some more specifics about what exactly you're looking for that is really important, so that we can get that in before the council sees the production of the development agreement in early September.
We do have time tonight. Are there highlights? Is it based on the matrix information that you're thinking should be included, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for the council by any means. So, please tell me if I heard wrong, but I thought that there was some broad agreement around some levels of addressing housing affordability. And, there are various mechanisms that can be used. It becomes a lot trickier for us to legislate them, especially after the fact. You basically can't, but that we could urge them to consider those kinds of things, and that might be a strong desire of the council. That's like an example.
Councilor Holloway?
And the conditions on lighting, number 23, and also in the matrix number 6, I believe if you review past discussion, we did have some input on that process, such that there would be an administrative review, but that lighting plan would come back to council for final approval. Can we have a version of this condition that has that incorporated as part of the review going forward?
Yes.
I do. Yeah, I'm I'm with you because in order for me to go 70 feet, there's got to be some give and take.
Yep.
And potentially part of that give and take is some requirement on affordable housing. I would ask that staff, provide us some wordage options, fill in the blanks, no specifics, but just fill in the blanks of what would be appropriate wording for that kind of thing that we can have a discussion around. So if you add that to the matrix and.
And I will say, we certainly heard that in the council's previous discussions, and we've started those discussions with the applicant directly. So they're aware it's coming. We know that the council has expressed a desire to see that. So that one in particular, we are working on.
Right, I just want to, when he walks across the bridge, I want a response of why he can see that building, and maybe that is, we got affordable housing
I'm
for
not
that
walking
additional
across
house.
a bridge. I'm driving.
No, I was pointing to Councilman Johnson.
Okay,
The
good.
reason I started back
There's
then is
no
I was
golf-
thinking
there's
about
no
the
golf
Riverwalk,
fairway that goes across the bridge.
which isn't in the record. So anyway.
Is Councilmember Mayhew reconnected?
I haven't seen him yet.
He doesn't have internet.
No, he texted.
You got that through osmosis?
Huh?
Oh, through osmosis, or he told us that he doesn't have
He
internet?
sent the
He
text.
just said
Oh.
that he didn't have internet.
Yeah.
Where's that?
Okay.
That means he's not attending. He could call in.
Well, what I'm getting at is there's a couple things. One is the deliberations are always best when we have a complete issues matrix in front of us. And we've, what does it say, May? No, never
It
mind.
does not. Stop that, get me in trouble.
And so having a full issues matrix with the things we've talked about in the last two meetings will be helpful to, the best way to say it is construct the discussions that we'll have. Which is, and I'm not suggesting anyone do things differently than, or do something, this is the way I'm doing it, gonna do it, but the way I did this on our previous, when we had a previous proposal, was to essentially construct an issues matrix similarly to of the items that I think we need to have deliberations on and things that are of concern. Knowing all of the items from all the council members is going to help that. I have a belief that all 7 council members should deliberate at the same time, and we're missing one who's our mayor pro tem. No one council member is more important than the other. It takes 4, as we know, there's 7 of us in total. So I understand sometimes we have to do things without people, but the only other thing I look at is that the timing, this will be my last item, I'm sorry, Mayor. The timing is such that it allows staff to construct the rest of the issues matrix, knowing staff has other things on obligations and that sort of thing. And then have us have enough time to prepare any additional questions, comments, and either send by email or have those conversations in a way that when we do get together on the 23rd, it can be very productive and directed. I feel like if we start deliberations tonight, I feel like I'd be winging it, and this project deserves more than that. So.
We do have the updated matrix, right? I think we didn't even have any questions that came in, so we didn't send it out last week because there weren't any new ones.
Correct. We certainly heard from the council last night. We have those noted down.
Yeah, it was yesterday was the
yeah.
last time we met since the
Right.
matrix came out, so that's why.
And of course, we've heard more tonight, so we will get that out this week to the council. Certainly, if you think of anything else, please send me an email and we'll.
You assumed I was out making business deals. What were you doing last night anyway?
Councilor Watton?
Appreciate the comments from Councilmember Johnson. I think it warrants a deeper discussion as far as housing balance, because this is an opportunity for us to maybe address or correct some deficiencies that we have overall, knowing that we only have so many housing units that are remaining to be developed, and how best to do it in a way that's equitable and also fair to the applicant. But I mean, things as far as number bedrooms, parking, size of the units. Those all play a factor in that attainability piece, and I'll cut my comments short there.
I would just caution council, you're doing two distinct things. You've got your quasi judicial hearing tonight and deliberations on just that. And then as separate from that, you have your development agreement. So keeping those separate tonight would be beneficial so no one misinterprets that you're using DA conditions when you're looking at criteria for the quasi judicial matter.
Thank you for pumping the brakes.
Well said, replacement Bob.
So hard to keep your head in the different lanes.
Councilor Essay?
So one of the things I do in my day job is when I've gone through a workshop or some sort of process on a project, and we get to a point where, okay, now we need to start talking about it. I go back and I reread what our job is. Could we, if it pleases the council and the mayor, of course, can we go back and let's look at what is our job here? What are we, what are we supposed to be doing? What is our role in that quasi judicial process and the actions? I know it's in here, but let's maybe spend just a few minutes doing that and refreshing that so that we don't have to be corrected when we want to say something.
Yes, we can have. Yes, we can absolutely do that. Ran out of battery.
Could that be led by me or is that by somebody else? Hopefully somebody else, please.
Well,
Councilor Holloway?
well, isn't the scope of our deliberations the deviations and the conditions? And any others of those that might arise in our discussion here based on the record? What did I-
In general terms, yes. I mean, I can go, let me find the right slide.
Yeah, let me pull that up.
Oops, this one.
Is there a lawyer maybe that can tell us when we...
Right. So this one, and some of the things are grayed out because of course we were discussing PUD tonight, but these are the three general areas for discussion. You have the PCI plan approval criteria in section 17.20.50. You have, and then within that you have the deviations, which are in subsection I of that. And then subsections J and K there reference the PUD criteria, the planned unit development criteria we've been talking about yesterday and today. So in a nutshell, that is what we're getting down to, and that's the decision that council needs to make, is applying these specific criteria to the application in front of you, utilizing all the information in the record to answer the various questions about does it comply with this, yes or no.
Councilor Holloway?
So I need to understand if I was being legally scolded.
Yes.
Well, no, it is not black and white on the deviations. There is room for saying, I'll take an example. If you don't want to extend the path all the way to the end of the border where it will connect to a future trail at some stage, then a koi fish pond over here would be appropriate give and take on that deviation. Is that an allowable conversation? That's a total hypothetical, and I have no intent of asking for a koi pond.
It would be, we'd have to look at the specific deviation and break it down and see if that was something acceptable for council to add to a particular deviation. So if you had thoughts like that, what I would say is look at how the hearing examiner looked at it and the testimony that was behind that deviation. And are you reading that testimony differently? And if so, how would you, revise that deviation. But you do have to stick specifically with what the code requires for each of those deviations.
Councilor Johnson?
Yeah, another clarifying point on deviations. Are those things that are allowed by the code in certain situations, but not required to be allowed? There's a difference. Meaning, like, if something meets a certain level of criteria, you're allowed to have a deviation, but that doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to be given the deviation.
So we would need, can we look at one of the deviation?
Yeah, 1 second. Let me find it here.
These are
A
also,
minor one.
Yeah,
It's
look
not-
at the path, the footpath one. right there.
That's actually
Down
what I
here.
found about.
So
these are also questions if you do your deliberations in closed session, questions to City Attorney Sturbank. How can I read this? This is what I'm thinking. Is that, defensible legally? So those are just questions you will be able to ask during deliberations too. He will be in your deliberations with you.
So I put on the screen there the deviation criteria that's in subsection I there. I'm also looking for loading the application up so we can see one of the deviations.
If it helps, Jason, I think the one Brian mentioned is street design deviations, item number 18. Which is the Mill Pond Road neighborhood collector deviation for the sidewalk.
Right, let me jump back here. Here, let me do.
He's got a pile of digital documents he's going through to get to
I
it.
just clicking around. So, okay, so here's the table showing the street section deviations for reference. So there are the 4 of them.
So yeah, it was
Councilor Johnson? No.
Thank you. Yeah, so just getting to my question here. These are all deviations. If they meet the required threshold that they could be allowed, are we required to allow them? Or can I just say, no, I just don't like any of those?
Okay, can you go back to the slide you had on before that?
And I mean,
Are you talking about
with or without justification,
The
if I just
code,
didn't
sorry.
like it,
It's fine. This
can I just say no?
You would not want to make any arbitrary determinations of, no, I just don't feel like it, So that wouldn't be allowed in any case. But what it says here in J is they have to show you a list of the standards that they want a deviation for, and a statement of how such deviation will achieve the purpose set forth in subsection A. So they have to prove that to you, and if they do, if they can prove that to you, then I would say the deviation is most likely should be granted.
Okay. Yeah, that was really my question was, if it reaches that threshold, then it would be difficult for us to deny the deviation.
Yes, you would want to find some valid reason it's not meeting that criteria as to why you wouldn't be allowing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And these are the criteria references in subsection A. I just wanted to add, the other thing that we've attempted to do when talking about the deviation specifically is to try to help the council understand how all these deviations fit together in the project as a whole, because as the city attorney was mentioning, you can't just carve individual ones off necessarily, because all of these are working together in the project proposal that you have in front of you.
Councilor Say.
So this is what you mentioned as far as the approval criteria, whereas subsection A through H. Can you go back to subsection I, which was mentioned in there which is the deviation. So I want to read that again, because our friendly attorney here just said something really important, and I want to make sure I hear it again. That the deviation would advance the purpose of the district as set forth in subsection A of this section, provided deviation shall not be allowed from development standards deemed necessary to protect health, safety, and environment. So that has to be enhance the purpose of the district, and I guess I'm reading, if I paraphrase, I don't want to paraphrase it wrong, but it should be one that protects the health, safety, or the environment. It meets those standards.
Advance the purpose of the district. And is not allowed, let's see.
It shall be
sorry.
not allowed from.
I'm at a really bad angle.
I know, it's not easy, it's not an easy one to read.
Oh, but see, I have to stand closer.
So the deviation shall not be allowed if the development standard is necessary to protect health, safety or the environment. So if you're finding, I apologize.
Use this one.
If you find that the standard protects health and safety and the deviation would not, that would be a reason to deny a deviation.
So if by chance we were deliberating tonight, I better raise my hand.
Counselor Lissay.
If we were actually deliberating tonight and just using this as the example that we were talking about with the sidewalks, if we were to determine that by reducing the sidewalk and not extending it, it did not protect health, safety, and the environment, that would be a reason to not allow that deviation.
Mm-hmm. So you would want to go back through testimony, see what supported both sides. Yeah.
Counselor Johnson.
Yeah, I think the word that is tripping me up is where it says the deviation from deviation from development standards of general applicability throughout the city may be authorized when the city council does stuff. The word may.
Not sure.
Not shall. Is what's standing out to me.
I would say, getting back to a comment from the city attorney earlier, this would likely be a good discussion to have in closed session when you could ask frankly, more candid questions of the attorney.
Yeah, we're talking hypotheticals. When you're
Oh, yeah.
when you're in deliberations, you will be able to ask City Attorney Sturbank, what about this? And lay out why, what you think should be changed or not changed, or why you're in favor of it. You won't have to talk in hypotheticals. Because I do think the point was made about having your 7 council members here. So it sounded to me like you were all very aware you wanted that 7th person to be able to catch up tonight and probably listen to this recording and be in on the
He
deliberations.
did indicate he
Councilor
would catch
Holloway?
the video. He did indicate he would catch the video.
Oh, good.
So he committed to do that, to catch up.
So he wasn't going to come then? Because I
Not
heard,
on Zoom. When the video is posted, he will review it to catch up and catch up with the rest of us.
okay. Counselor Benson?
Yeah, I'm unfortunately not going to be able to be here on the 23rd. So,
I'll be
but I
dialing
think we'll
in
have a
remote.
quorum.
I'll be in the Mountain Time Zone, dialing in remote.
Right. It's summer, it's not always able to get all council members together, but each council member has this equal say, so as long as you have quorum, we're here. Any other comments or questions regarding the topics that we discussed tonight? Should we look at the calendar? So we will get the matrix back out this week.
Correct. So if you think of additional questions you would like us to address on the matrix, we would ask if you at all could, please get them to us by the end of the day tomorrow. That will give us an opportunity to provide a response and get the matrix back out to the council by Friday. So you have that to consider leading up to the next meeting.
Councilor Holloway?
But yeah, as proposed, can we have that executive session either at next council or the next meeting right off the bat?
Absolutely.
discussing this?
Yes, we can plan that up front. Okay,
Yeah, it's council meeting on the 20th.
any other questions? So next time is council deliberations, and then following that, by the 8th, we will have the development agreement. We will have the draft out to you before then. We will review the development agreement during the meeting, so. Anything else?
Thank you, everybody.
All right, so
Good job, Jason.
is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? No, we are adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone, for spending summer evening.